views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am Daren, Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. Now, if you're asking what the Social Justice Forum is all about, well, we're a show that deals with some of the inequities that people face. We talk about civic engagement. We also have multiple points of view, and we invite you to be a part of listening, hearing, and interacting with our discussion. Stay tuned. The Social Justice Forums starts now. And we are back here, and welcome back to the Social Justice Forums. A lot happening throughout the course of this past week. First off, in Minnesota, the death of Daunte Wright has sparked yet another outrage as Daunte Wright killed by Minneapolis police. The question is, what happened? We know what happened. Now, what happens from here? In addition to that, Georgia state lawmakers have overhauled its existing election protocols last month with the passage of a law, including restrictions, which some activists say they haven't seen since the Jim Crow era. Georgia's new Election Integrity Act has important provisions which will unfairly restrict the rights of people to vote legally, securely, and safely. Now, while the law expands access to voting in some ways, such as lengthening times for early voting in the general election, it also erects new unnecessary hurdles. These laws will disproportionately harm Black, Brown, as well as Native American voters. Joining me now to share more details on the matter, I'm joined by the former vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, Michael Blake. And Mike, good to have you.
Always good to be with you, D.
Hey, let's first get at it. And I want to talk, let me take our attention before we talk about voting to the matter that everybody in America is talking about right now, the death of Daunte Wright. Your reaction to what you saw on video?
I've been emotional. Been very emotional about it. I've been trying to really understand and put into words what we watched. You were stopped for air fresheners. You were held for a warrant that shouldn't have existed. You were on the call with your mom to let her know that you're making moves to your brother's house, and the next time she gets a call on FaceTime, it's from your girlfriend to say that you've been shot by the police. How can you feel safe as a Black man in America? And he was 20 years old. He was a kid. He was a kid. And when you think about that could happen while in the midst of the George Floyd saga, which I want to be very clear, is the Derek Chauvin trial, not the George Floyd trial. And then you see the video that comes out about a U.S. Army lieutenant in Virginia, which that was in December, being treated in that way. It all becomes overly emotional. So Daren, the reality is, in the conversation I've been having the last few days, it's been very tough because it is a reminder of anti-Blackness and the notion of people feeling that Black men are undervalued and do not count and do not matter. But it is a further reminder that we have to turn this pain into promise, this pain into progress. And there have to be changes with policies. Chauvin has to be convicted. There have to be true accountability that happens with our criminal justice system. And then we have to find ways to demonstrate that we have to go further in all of our cities.
Where do you think we would be without the emergence of videotape? It was Will Smith who said, it's not that it hasn't happened, it's just it's being filmed.
Well, you think about Will Smith and the reality of film, and kudos to him and taking the movie out of Georgia for called Emancipation because of their restrictions and the laws they've put there. You know, Emmett Till was not the first Emmett Till. It might have been just the one that we've seen. George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Daunte Wright and et cetera, they're not the first. It's what we're seeing. But it doesn't make it easier. In many ways, it may make it harder. And to our non-Black friends, we are not looking for saviors. We're looking for allies. In this moment, as you're watching this, if you are able to watch what you have seen and say nothing and not demand changes and not to be further in the struggle, your silence is showing that you are compliant with this all. And this is that time for reflection. You know, maybe these cameras are showing you what people are having within their inner souls that you haven't seen before. And it requires a reckoning and a reform like never before. And Daren, I think very concretely, as we saw during the civil rights movement and before, when these moments happened, it prompted, it necessitated legislative changes and people being held accountable economically and through the criminal justice system. And this is the same now. If you would stop killing us, we wouldn't be asking you to prosecute others.
I want to talk about that for a real quick moment. New York State does have stricter gun laws than most of the country. Where can we do better in the area of gun reform?
Well, quite frankly, people shouldn't be able to transport guns in any high capacity at all. There's no real good reason why there should be assault weapons anywhere in the country, quite frankly. But there is the deeper reality, in my opinion. What are we doing to change the conditions in the communities in the first place so someone's not picking up a gun? If you help someone to pick up a book bag, then they're not arresting them for a dime bag.
Right.
And so if you help sustain and create better paying jobs and better schools and homes that don't have lead in them and running water that is fresh and the opportunity for ownership and not just renting and the opportunity of respecting our people for who we are. If you do those things, then someone's not thinking I need to pick up a gun in the first place. And too often the conversations are being rooted in let's change it on the back end. No change on the front end, the structural racism that exists in the policies and the economic conditions in our communities itself. And when you think about the dynamic of what I'm hearing now in the Daunte Wright tragedy, the notion of, well, they didn't know the difference between a taser and a gun, then you shouldn't have a damn job as a cop in the first place. And the premise is if we were to do that, not as an officer, we would be in jail. So it's not just about access to guns, it's access to justice. It's access to parity is what we're really looking for.
Well, let me stay right there with you, right? I just had the conversation yesterday. I said, have you ever watched the first 48? You ever watch any of these shows? You hear people say, listen, I didn't mean to kill the person. I accidentally shot the person. The gun accidentally went off. The next thing you know, you see the next credits that come out, and the credits come out and they say, such and such was sentenced to murder in prison, doing 25 to life on accidental. The fact that somebody passes it off as an accidental discharge, first of all, language is damning all by itself, offensive in another category. And secondly, when you think about it, okay, if it happens to the average person and they have to be sentenced to life in prison, why shouldn't the same sentence, if not more, or equally, I should say, be given to a police officer?
Well, but again, let's take it a step further, though, which you're right on this, Daren. If Daunte was seen as a white kid, there's not a taser happening.
Right.
Right. And I think what's most appalling and frustrating to me is all of this is rooted in anti-Blackness. I want my Latino sisters and brothers to hear this and Caribbean sisters brothers to hear this as well, because you are Black, as the lieutenant showed in Virginia. It is a visual. It's the CNN reporter, Omar Jimenez, who went to Northwestern like I did, came in after Afro-Latino. It is an anti-Blackness. In Georgia, it is the premise of we have to change these laws because Warnock just won and we don't want him to win again and we don't want Stacey to be successful when she goes go. It's an anti-Blackness. And until we are willing to be very direct about that, you cannot reform a system where persons are rooted in that. You have to hold them accountable and remove them. That's what has to change. It's not just, do you have access to more guns? Do you have access to more training? It's, do you see me as a human? And that's all this is rooted in right now. And so in this manner, I get so disgusted by people who want to apologize for racism. Well, you know, there's other factors. No, there's not. You're racist. Period. We don't need a back and forth on this. You believe that the defense, think about this in the Derek Chauvin case. Their argument they're trying to make is, well, maybe he was on drugs and maybe he had all these other conditions. Oh, but we're just going to ignore that you had you had your knee on his neck, in which the medical examiners even said it was a homicide. Your superiors have said you shouldn't have done it. We're just going to, no, don't worry about that. And so all these pieces are entwined. And bringing it back to New York, we saw many policies change last year, Daren, when the George Floyd's tragedy happened. Open discovery, speedy trial, et cetera, many different elements around that. But now it's a reminder that we have to go further and that we have to change the economic and criminal justice paradigms in our communities so that we are not even wondering in the first place what's happening. Think about this, tie these all together. When too many times these instances are rooted, and stay with me, y'all, around limited money. George Floyd, check. Eric Garner, allegedly selling Lucy's. Khalif Browder. Dante Wright, all these instances. Well, did they take a plea? Did they plead guilty? Did they pay these? All of this rooted in all these different pieces. And yet on the other aspect, to a completely different demographic, you have white actors and actresses who were bribing and paying their way to try to get their kids into colleges. Their kids weren't asking for that. That was about privilege and power. And so in that instance, you have families that are essentially getting limited time, but for us, we're getting no time because we're dead. Right. And until we are willing to recognize that and say, in New York City, in New York State, and in federal laws, all of these pieces have to change immediately. When you think about the mayoral election, the city council election, the borough president races, the district attorney races, you think about the federal races that are coming up, all of these pieces are intertwined because of what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. Let's move down and talk a little bit about these laws in Georgia, which we brought in the open and the lead of the show, talking about what's going on in Georgia, the Georgia suppression, voter suppression. I know you, as the former vice chair of the DNC, have worked very closely with Stacey Abrams and others down there in Georgia. What is your reaction to what you see happening in Georgia? And so much, so it's so blatant that, as we know, the MLB has said, Major League Baseball says, we're not having our All-Star game here.
They mad that black folk are winning.
Right.
Period. Full stop. And again, I just think like we gotta let's stop with the games, everybody. There was no rigged election. Joe Biden won Georgia. Raphael Warnock won Georgia. Even the Republican Secretary of State said this happened. This is an entity. And this is the epitome, and it's important, always I say this, there's a difference between racism and prejudice. Prejudice anyone can have within their psyche. Isms are when you institutionalize it. And why would you institutionalize to make it harder for people to vote when just purely coincidental, the black man is going to be on the ballot again for US Senate, and you're preparing for Stacey Abrams to run for governor? But it's purely coincidental, right? And so in this manner, the dynamic that's being communicated of, well, I could potentially have an illegal behavior against me for providing food and water. Do we understand how absurd that even sounds? Making it harder. Now someone will say, well, they've addressed early voting and it's better in some other states. But again, let's not ignore the root of what prompted this. We don't, being Republicans, want Black people and allies of Black people to show up to vote. And when you think about why this is being elevated across Georgia and other states, it is the broader reality of the magnitude of 2022, Daren, because of redistricting and what will happen with these federal seats and local races as well, where there is a fear of the reckoning that could happen, that you have a President Biden whose polling is still off the charts, who had an incredible successful COVID relief bill and is now moving on to infrastructure, and stating very clearly, when you do these things for the people, people will align with us, and they are afraid of Democratic victories continuing. And this is a very simple premise. They are more concerned with winning an election than you losing your life and your rights.
And, you know, the other thing about it is when we really look at what's going on, let's put it in context here. Republicans and those in Georgia are really working hard to change these voting laws. And there's something else that's at play here. How about you change your message? How about you change how you structure? How about you do something to actually gain more voters rather than trying to steal the vote, which is what this really is all about?
Well, you can't change a message when you don't believe that anyone that's not a white, straight man should have power. And when we approach it with that level of clarity, then it becomes understandable. You know, David Seamus, who was our brilliant strategist with us in the Obama campaigns, he said always it was a 3-word vision: find your why. And it was always in that mindset of when you keep asking why, then you really get to the crux of the matter. Why are you changing these laws now? Because you lost. Why are you doing this? Because Black people showed up in mass. And Latino people who are growing in their number in Georgia are doing it as well. So changing a message, Daren, they could, but they don't believe in it. They do not believe that we should have power. And think about this. Now you have Mitch McConnell threatening corporations of saying there will be retaliation on you. Just internalize that again. There will be Republican retaliation on corporations that are saying you shouldn't suppress the vote. That should show you that they believe strategically it is more important to dig in than to help you to lift up.
So for those of us who are in New York, those of us who are in the tri-state area, you have an opportunity to see what's going on in Georgia, but what can the average person in New York do to assist in this situation when you got voter suppression like that going down in Georgia and they want to be of support?
June 22nd will be one of the most consequential days in the history of New York because of the municipal elections happening here. Everybody think about this. You have a mayor, public advocate, comptroller, 4 out of 5 borough presidents, 35 out of 51 city council districts, and a Manhattan district attorney's race, all happening on the same day. And separate from the DA's race, because that's under state election laws, as opposed to the rest being city laws, you have ranked choice voting. And as a reminder to everyone, for ranked choice voting, you will be able to pick up to your top 5 candidates for these elections. So you pick, now I'm with Maya Wiley for mayor and I'm with Brian Benjamin for comptroller, but I'm just using this for an example. If you were to pick a Maya for a first choice and then you pick whomever for a second choice and a third choice, another for a fourth and a fifth, what then will happen, everyone, this is important for us to understand, whoever gets the least amount of votes will be eliminated after the first round. That will likely be the write-in vote. Then whoever after that is the least amount of votes, then they get eliminated. And will continue until someone gets 50% plus 1. We just saw one of the special elections here in the Bronx. It took 10 rounds of voting. Now, why is this important to your question, Daren? Because there won't be runoffs. It's just one time. So whether you show up for early voting or absentee voting, or you vote on June 22nd, this is how you exercise your power. Why is this connected to your question? Voting is how you exercise your voice. This is when you say enough is enough. This is when you say, you know what? I am sick and tired of what is happening in our communities. And I want to know that we're going to have a mayor and a comptroller and a city council electorate and district attorneys and borough presidents that absolutely understand what's at stake. You know, for Natalia Fernandez here in the Bronx, what you're seeing in Manhattan with Dan Court and Alvin Bragg, you know, there's so many phenomenal people that at the end of the day, it is you cannot just say that our ancestors and our forefathers and our foremothers die for the right to vote. Because in 2021, people are still dying for the right to vote. And so if you care about housing, if you care about criminal justice, you care about businesses, if you care about COVID relief, if you care about the opportunity for us to continue to advance as a people, and you care about what's happening in Georgia, you're disgusted about what's going on in Virginia, you're appalled by what's happening in Minnesota, then you have a responsibility to vote. And so please go to NYC Votes to learn about the candidates, to learn about the information, to exercise your voice in this moment. Because at the end of the day, you know, as Dr. King said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. When you don't vote, you are being silent, and we cannot have that happen again.
Can't have it happen again. Cannot. And honestly, when we think about what's going on right now, we think about the fact that, there are a lot of people out there who are, you know, have the right to vote. I remember in the Obama, I should say when Trump was elected the first time against Hillary Clinton, 54% of eligible American voters did not exercise their right to vote. What can you say about New York? Are New York voters equally as engaged?
Well, we've become more engaged when it comes to our primaries. We, of course, need to be very engaged when it comes to our general election, because next year you'll have statewide races up and down the ballot itself. But you got to be voting for everything and all the time. And look, Trump's numbers actually went up in several parts across the state, including in the Bronx, because of social conservatism that exists. And you had people who tried to communicate because of abortion and gay marriage that they were better for you, even though they were putting your kids in cages and shooting and killing Black folk and not giving women opportunity to exercise their right to choose. So all these different dynamics we cannot ignore. And so yeah, we're getting better, Daren, but we're nowhere where we need to be. And so this is like anything you care about. I try to make it very simple when I talk to folks about civic engagement. And thanks to President Mark Jerome, I'm now teaching at Monroe College. We're doing an effort on civic engagement, social justice, and government. We're doing it Tuesdays and Thursdays with high school students, about 120 of them. Think about this way. You would never tell your kid, go to high school or to college for 1 out of 4 years and then think that it's going to work for them. So why on earth would we say, you know what, go vote once every 4 years and everything's going to be fine?
Right.
So just internalize these things, everybody. Internalize that if you're sick, you're not thinking, man, I need the perfect doctor. And if I don't agree with every single doctor, I'm not going to go there. If you need your tire fixed, you're not going to be like, man, I need the perfect mechanic before I do these things. But when we talk about the individuals who have the greatest ability at scale to change policies to help you, we go through this exercise of where they're not the perfect candidate. There's only one perfect person in my belief, and I think Daren's same for you, and that's Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so the notion for me is, do I believe this person has the best ability to help us? And if you're a Jewish faith, you're a Muslim faith, obviously you could appreciate it in your own dynamic. But the point being made, we have a responsibility to be more engaged here in New York. And it's the reason why we're taking the steps that we are right now. And so if you want to learn about what we're doing at Monroe College locally, if you want to figure out how we're supporting different causes, there's something special that's happening. And you should see that. Don't just have the videos be about the protest. Have the videos be about us standing in lines to make sure we exercise our right to vote as well.
Let me turn to tables a little bit and talk a little bit about another issue that many of us are dealing with here, and that's the issue of immigration. A lot of Bronxites have been affected by immigration and these new immigration policies that are out there. Give me your thoughts on what you see happening with immigration now.
Well, very grateful for the leadership of Vice President Harris taking on this critical issue. Of course, Secretary Mayorkas and others leading as well at DHS. Look, immigration because, and we've allowed this to be the case. Republicans have tried to create this as a anti-Latino and anti-Mexican premise, which is foolish and is wrong. It is racist. Unless you are a slave or a Native American, you're an immigrant, right? And so sometimes we allow this notion to exist because, again, of an anti. So to our Latino sisters and brothers, especially the Garifuna community, the work that's happening right now from the Biden-Harris administration and focusing on what are we doing in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, because if I improve the conditions of, you may decide you want to stay there, which would be the case anywhere. More times people leave because they want to go for better opportunity, which is life. You get one life to live. We also got to think about immigration, whether it be for Jamaica, whether it be for Trinidad and Tobago, and the broader Caribbean region as well. Think about it from our African sisters and brothers, why we need to have a little Africa here in the Bronx. And that's been something that others have said, as I have, that we need to implement. So the policies and the vision of it, absolutely applaud. We got to do more for our dreamers, of course. But we're now in the premise where immigration should be received as a humanity issue and an issue that benefits all of us. How can you be in the Bronx and not think that our immigrant communities won't make us stronger? And so in the entity, whether it be for entrepreneurship, whether it be our community relations, whether it be for our policies, and this is where we go back again, your livelihood is impacted immensely by the policies that are being implemented. And the people that are being elected are the ones that will help you the most.
What do we see by way of ICE? You know, we've heard a lot of ICE cases in the borough of the Bronx with immigration enforcement. Have we seen a relaxation? Have you heard of the relaxation of ICE in this new presidential administration, particularly here locally?
Well, ICE still has a presence, and we can't ignore that reality. Does there need to be reform for ICE? Yes. Does there need to be, the appreciation? And sorry if you're hearing the sound. I got all kind of construction going on. This is that 2021 Zoom.
Listen, this is what we do virtually. We expect everything. I'm lucky I don't see the dog run across the back. Go ahead.
Exactly. That's what how you're doing right there. When we think about what has to change, of course, there has to be changes with ICE. We had a former administration that was utterly inhumane. Now, do you need to have an element of law enforcement for any of these dynamics? Yes. However, should I be tossing kids in cages and separating families and making it harder for you to unite? Absolutely not. And so I just think there has to be that balance. And what I would say simultaneously, Daren, is, are there a bunch of cops that I disagree with? Absolutely. There's also a lot of cops that I do agree with because I think they're doing the right thing. And so there's, on that local dynamic, from a domestic perspective, do not say that a system should not exist. The system the way it currently exists should not exist. Right? And I think that's how we treat ICE, that you have to approach it in what are we doing to make it easier, to make sure that as you are going through that journey, which again, you're typically doing that journey because you're trying to find a better life for your family and you're trying to leave from conditions that you don't think are safe. Let's make it easier for you to become a part of the society that should be embracing you rather than harm.
Well, I want to talk about police. As you talk about ICE, we want to talk about police reform. A lot of people talk about defund the police and a lot of controversy about the word. But the reality is that people are thinking when you talk about defund the police, it is reallocating funds from a police department to other various agencies that can be beneficial to the community. You in favor of that?
Well, yes, of the reallocation of funds. And this is where I think we get into these terrible messaging battles. And I understand the dynamic of when we say defund the police, why is it being said that way? Because it has a shock and awe impact. I do not believe, nor does Maya Wiley and others, that you should defund the police. Because functionally, that would essentially say, are you just going to eliminate the police department? No, because something's going to happen. There's going to be an emergency. You're going to need someone. You're going to call 911. Now, do you need police in every interaction? No, you can have crisis interrupters and you can have peace communities. Shout out to Erica Ford and so many others, or at Life Camp or Save Our Streets and so many different groups that are doing great work. But do we need to absolutely reallocate funds within the police department to put it towards prevention and community reinvestment? 1,000%. Should we have less officers that are armed near and around schools? 1,000%. But I go back to the beginning when we were on guns, Daren. Like at the end of the day, help me to help the communities on the front end. So we're not talking about the cops on the back end. Help the kids to have jobs. Have a dedicated effort where you say, we're going to focus not just on retail, but we're going to put support around groups like the Knowledge House on mass ideation and Meta Bronx to train and develop the young people in the skills of today and tomorrow. So you can make real money safely and securely. You know, engage with the Operation Hopes of the world so you can understand financial literacy. Engage with the Institute for Entrepreneurial Leadership of the world so you can understand how do you grow your business. EOC, the Educational Opportunity Center. So again, you can get the skills and the training. You know, this is what we need to be doing so that when you reallocate that the funding structure, you're not just saying I'm giving it so that the cops have a strategic resource group where it essentially looks like it's an armed battalion outside, but rather community officers and community reinvestment. That should be our premise. And that's going to be a large decision of who gets elected in these city posts in June.
When we talk about seeing, the defund the police, reallocation of funds, we know that there's also been some legislation here in New York State that's actually dealt with how police records are actually being released, the ability for us to be able to see the disciplinary records. We've heard police and those in the high brass officials say, we're against that because it's a personnel matter. But even so, a judge has ruled in favor of that 50A. Talk to us about that and how you feel that bolsters community police trust.
Well, one, I was a huge proponent of the repeal of 50A, and I was glad to be a part of the legislature when we did that. The argument being made was a talking point of shielding of personnel records. No one sending your date of birth, your social security number, your home address. None of that was being sent out there. That was a scare tactic. Let's make it very simple to everybody. If an officer has disciplinary issues, you should know. Full stop. It's really not that hard when you start breaking it down to people. Like, hey, I should probably know that you've been brought up on disciplinary charges 6 times for misconduct, for whatever the reasons may be. Now, there could be a whole host of reasons as to why that occurred, but I should probably know what's happening, right? And so it will grow trust because, one, for someone who is doing all the right things, you got nothing to worry about. You have nothing to worry about, right? It's like a doctor. If the doctor's doing everything's fine, you got nothing to worry about. If you're a nonprofit, you should share your financial records. Otherwise, you got nothing to worry about. Like, to me, again, these are common sense things, right? You wouldn't want your kid to be around a teacher who has misconduct and you're not aware of those things. And so transparency is essential for growth. And so for us to have a chance to grow and develop further, we need to have better opportunities. And I appreciate you doing this, Daren, because at the end of the day, the social justice conversation to make more people aware, hey, these laws are now happening. Now let's make sure people are aware that they're happening so that on the flip side, the bad actor will think twice. You know what? Well, hold on. If I do these things, it's going to go out there. It's going to be out there. And I'm not sure if I really want that. And so 50A is this law that's important. And all of this is a part of transparency. 50A, speedy trial so that the clock does not stop between the defense and prosecution. When someone says, well, I need to find another witness, I need a piece of information, open discovery so that you know what the prosecution has on you when you're the defense and vice versa. Now, there need to be reforms around this, in terms of additional time. I understand that. But at the end of the day, it is time to get out of the darkness when it comes to policing. You should know what is happening, and you should know if someone's done something wrong. And then from there, make your decisions on how you interact with that officer and with the system thereafter.
Yeah. We're going to get ready to wrap things up, but I'll give you an opportunity. You're on a lot of different fronts. Is there anything in particular you want us to know before we leave?
Well, I guess it's in my good Jamaican American blood to have a lot of jobs. My mom always teases me about that. So, as I mentioned, teaching at Monroe, and shout out to that entire team of Mark Jerome and their leadership Tuesdays and Thursdays. We're going to be building out a My Brother's Keeper Institute to make sure we have one central place on what we're doing as well for boys and young men of color. Been really engaged in launching out the work I'm doing right now in our Atlas Strategy Group. atlasstrategy.group, so you can see how we're helping support individuals and entities across the city, state, and country. I've been very excited about a new Black-owned, minority-owned sports TV network called Next Level Sports and Entertainment. Shout out to Andre Gudger, who is the owner and bought. People should learn that this is happening, and there's going to be some really exciting developments that are going to be going with that as well. This is the day for us to really get in the game and show what's possible in our communities. And look, everybody, again, I always say I'm a Creston and Burnside kid, so I'm always going to be in the game. You're going to see me present, have my hands in a lot of different projects happening here locally. But if there's anything you can do in making sure that you exercise your voices and that you exercise your right to vote in this June election, that's the most important thing I'm asking you to do for the projects I'm a part of.
Mike Blake, thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum, and definitely a lively conversation and really insightful and informational. Thank you very much, Michael Blake.
Always, Daren. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you for everything you're doing.
All righty. Listen, we got to take a quick break. We got more on the Social Justice Forums. Stay with us. We're coming right back right after this.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting BronxNet.
And welcome back to the show. The New York Foundling helps children, youth, and adults and families in need through services, supports, and advocacy, strengthening family and community, and helping each individual reach their full potential. They provide carefully designed programs, effective and interrelated services, as well as opportunities for children, families, and adults to create transformational change in their own lives. Joining me to share a little bit more on this, I'm pleased to be joined by the president of New York Foundling, Bill Baccaglini. And Bill, good to have you.
Hey, Daren, thanks for having me back. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Hey, as always, as always. And when we talk amidst these challenging times, you know, you really are doing a great job in terms of trying to provide services. So for people who aren't familiar with New York Foundling, let's first give them a little bit of an overview.
Okay, we're about 151 years old at this point. Started by the Sisters of Charity in 1869, and we've grown to be about a $220 million agency, approximately 3,000 staff. We provide child welfare services, juvenile justice services, services for the developmentally disabled. We're in every borough in the city, the surrounding counties, and we provide Head Start services to 1,500 families in Puerto Rico.
Wow. Pretty amazing work, you know, pretty busy job. Talk to us about some of the things that you really do. I want to get first to, you know, youth in the juvenile justice system. We see that number continue to increase. And as those numbers continue to increase, of course, the need for more services. A little bit more about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I would say this to you, Daren. We firmly believe, and maybe it's owing to where I came from. I was in public policy in Albany for many years, first at the New York State Division for Youth and then at the Office of Children and Family Services. We actually believe in New York State that we've overvalued residential care and incarceration. And we think very little good long-term comes out of long incarcerative stays. So we believe that offenders, young people who have committed whatever act they've committed, we believe they're best served, as long as they're safe and the community is safe, we believe they're best served in the context of family and the context of community. And so that's what we do. We're not big, you know, if someone came to me and said, Bill, I'll give you $1 million to open up a detention center, I wouldn't do it. We're not big believers in incarceration. We're big believers in personal responsibility. We're big believers in accountability, but we think there's smarter ways to do it. And so we have an evidence-based intervention that can actually be administered with young people right in the context of the community. And, you know, the rearrest rates are very, very low. The judges are very enamored of the program. It's actually called Families Rising, and it works to get young people off of Rikers Island. And so that's our major justice program at that point. We're very happy going down that road. Leave residential care, leave detention centers to others who believe in it and do it better than we would. We're big believers in keeping folks in the community, because here's why, Daren. At the end of the day, if you remove a young person, 16 and 17 years old, for the majority of crimes. Now we're taking, you know, we're not talking mass murders, the typical felony, for example, you take them and you put them in an incarcerative environment for 6 months, a year, 18 months. It's an open question of whether you're going to be able to get them back into the community. And so we would argue it's best not even to sever those community ties and work with them right within the community while keeping the public safe and keeping them, you know, responsible for their behavior and accountable. I'm not talking about, oh, you know, go do whatever you want to do. That's not what we're about. We have strict program rules, and when you violate the program rules, there are consequences. We go back to court and say to the judge, hey, judge, Johnny didn't do exactly what he was told, so we're not so sure he's going to be successful. So there's accountability built in. But for the vast majority of these young people, the community is where accountability needs to be adhered to, I think.
Yeah. And you talk about young people, let's talk about families for a minute, because in addition to working with those who are incarcerated or potentially incarcerated, you do a great job with families. And I know one of the programs you have is Families Rising.
Families Rising. Yeah, no, Families Rising is a program we started, a few years ago with the help of a retired Supreme Court judge, a famous judge in New York City, Michael Corriero, who started to do some work at the Foundling, liked the interventions we had. And he said, let me take this to my colleagues, my former colleagues on the bench. I think they'd love it. And so we work with judges, we work with corporation counsel, we work with defense attorneys to actually examine the young folks who are on Rikers Island and say, listen, this probably isn't the best place for them or for the community long term. We think we can work with these folks in the community. So The judges have bought in. We had to have a waiting list. Well, pre-pandemic, we had a waiting list for the program. And what it is that the judges, these youngsters are already convicted, right? So they've already been found guilty or have pled guilty to a felony. And what the offer is this, what judges will offer them, okay, listen, Johnny, we're going to let you participate in this program. And if you successfully complete this program, in exchange, we will seal your record and you'll have youthful offender status. And the program has been a tremendous success. The rearrest rates out of it are a quarter the rearrest rates for young people returning from correctional facilities. So we're ecstatic about Families Rise, and we believe it's fundamentally a game changer for these young people.
When we talk about young people, obviously, we know that they have a lot of challenges and a need for a lot of services. And so as we talk about this, mentoring is also a huge, important thing. Talk to us about mentorship, because I know that's something that you do at New York Foundling, the idea of mentorship, bringing people forward and helping people to be able to pay it forward.
Yeah, we actually think, Daren, we think mentoring that's well done, not willy-nilly, oh, here's a mentor, just mentors who are well-trained, who understand the kids, who understand the community context in which these young people live with, I don't want to say a menu, but with some training, we find that they're life coaches to these kids. If the Foundling does the appropriate matches, we find that these things sustain themselves going forward for years. Now think about it. There are many of the young people that we talk about, whether it's the kids in foster care, aging out of care, or the young people we're trying to get off of Rikers Island, their ties to their own families are strained, right? Some of them don't even have ties any longer to their families. So the idea that we can provide them with an adult who understands the context in which they live, we find that it pays incredible dividends to coach them through. Think about the age these kids are at, 17 to 22. When you and I were 17 and 22, we were making critical decisions that would be with us for the rest of our life. These kids are being asked to make these decisions without any supports. It's silly. And so we provide them with mentors/coaches. We're part of a program. I'm sure you've heard about it, Daren. If not, you should get our youth advisory board on your show. Erica Francois, who heads up, a former foster care youth, who heads up our advisory board. It's a program called Fair Futures. And what it does is it assigns a coach and a tutor to all kids in foster care from middle school onward. And our hope is that these coaches will be able to fund these coaches until these young people reach 26. That's what these young people need. So I highly recommend that you get Erica on to talk more in depth about Fair Futures, because it too is a fundamental game changer for these young people.
So when you look at mentorship, right, I think a lot of people say there's value in it. There's some people who really don't understand it. For you, what is the sticking point in mentorship that you would like to convey to somebody else who may think about even possibly being a mentor?
Oh boy, it's being able to, it's one, understanding young people, appreciating what young people can contribute, appreciating the decisions these young people are soon going to have to make. It's not rocket science, Daren. So I am certain 80% of your viewers, 80, 90% of your viewers could be good mentors. It's having that shoulder to lean on. It's having that open mind, that soft ear to hear what these kids have been through, some of the struggles they've been through, and it's directing them. Again, it's accountable. No, Johnny, you shouldn't do that. Maybe you should do this. It's kids. Listen, kids are looking for direction and support, but they want unconditional love. They want unconditional friendship. They don't want every relationship conditioned upon them doing X will do Y. That's not how you grew up. That's not how I grew up. That's not what these kids want. So, and I'm sure the vast majority of your listeners, it requires no specialized training. It requires a big heart and an open mind. And most folks can be very, very good mentors.
I know you're filling a gap in one other area that I want to talk about, and that is that of mental health. Because when we talk about COVID-19, what we have seen further exacerbated throughout the course of time is the need for mental health services. How are you approaching mental health within the organization?
Oh, Daren, I'd be lying to you if I didn't say I'm nervous about what we're going to find coming out of COVID once the clouds lift. As you know, we operate a charter school in the South Bronx on Brown Place for young people in the child welfare work, kids who are in foster care whose families are receiving preventive services. And we've been operating all year, and God, some of the stories, oh, Daren, the mental health challenges, you just can't take a 9-year-old and say, we're going to freeze you for 14 or 15 months. Then we're just going to pick up where we left off. It doesn't work. So I believe that mental health services coming out of this will be the biggest need that we see, that and educational regression, learning loss. Those two things will be the things that drive the Foundling over the next year or two. Now, I'll say this to you. How are we organizing? Gone, Daren, I'm not so sure it should have ever been appropriate, but gone are the days where we want the families to come to our clinic. Come to our clinic, Mrs. Smith, and bring your children with you. No. The problem with clinics, Daren, is clinics are context free. We see a young person in a clinic and we don't really understand the social milieu in which they live or that the family lives. Right. So we actually believe mental health services need to be brought to the community and provided by people who understand the community. So that's what we're doing. Our services are all home-based, clinically focused, but I tell you, I am nervous. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, oh, we'll have no problem handling the needs emerging from COVID. I'm not so sure. We're going to do our best. We think we have an idea on the scale, but it's still an open question. So there's good reason for you and for me, for Latricia, for the Bronx community to be nervous about what we're going to find once the clouds lift.
I mean, let's be honest. What we're talking about here is the potential for possibly a lot of PTSD, and PTSD from people who've never had it before. This has become traumatic. And when you look at people who've got COVID fatigue, may have lost their job, may have lost their loved one, you may have someone that has not had any challenges, all of a sudden now having challenges and, dealing with this now.
Oh, no, and that's exactly right. And you know what? Anybody who comes on your show and tells you that they've got this figured out, they're not telling you the truth. Our ears are to the ground. Our eyes are wide open, and we think our charter school gives us some insights into what we're going to see in the larger community once the cloud lifts. But this is going to be very, very complicated. And I would urge all of those in this sector, in this work, move your services to the community. Context, while it's always been important, is going to be even more critical this time around. And then learning loss and education. Think about this. Daren, let me give you this number. 50% of the young people in foster care in 9th grade repeat 9th grade. Repeat, 50%. Right. Now, think about next year, because the city is going to have to socially promote kids because they need the space. You just can't freeze and let 8th graders be 8th graders again, because they got to bring the 7th graders up to be 8th graders. So if you have 50% of 9th graders in a normal year repeating 9th grade, if you're in foster care, think about what's going to happen next year.
Right.
The learning loss and education regression is going to be unbelievable. So what the Foundling's done is we put $1.5 million of our own money with the same amount from the Hilton Foundation, and we are tutoring every 9th grader in foster care across the entire city, regardless of what agency they're in, because we know what's going to happen if we can't keep these kids academically current. They're going to drop out of school, and guess what? It's the Black and brown kids from the Black and brown communities where this is going to be the most pronounced, and we just can't have that. We just can't have it.
I mean, that's why I love talking to you, Bill, because you have your finger on the pulse. And I mean, I don't mean that I mean that real seriously, that you have your finger on the pulse and it's not, you're just talking it, but really you understand it and you get it. I want to ask you, when was the aha moment to say, listen, we need to contextually pivot and take ourselves from being this agency that's like, we wait for you to come to us now coming to you, because some of the stuff that you're talking about doing, you were doing pre-COVID.
Yes, yes. The aha moment for me, and it goes back to how you and I started a few minutes ago, this conversation, that I've never been a big fan of congregate care settings. I think because you've broken ties with the community. So we've always been very, very community focused. Then 10, 12 years ago, after reviewing a lot of programs that were used across the country, these evidence-based models so that they had done clinical trials on, as it turns out, they were all family and community-based. We married the ideology with the interventions, and I think we've actually moved the system. Now ACS, most of its preventive services are evidence-based and more focused on the community. They're going more into primary prevention. We think it's critical. We think it's important. The community, listen, kids' issues are the product of relationships, some good, some bad, but they're the product of relationships. And for us to analyze kids in isolation from those relationships is silly and short-sighted.
Talk to us about how the organization carries out funding and being able to do what you do.
Well, funding's going to get even more complicated. Now, again, with the federal stimulus and the state budget, we'll wait to see what the city budget looks like in July. But we think that the finger's in the dam for the next year. We were very nervous, but the federal stimulus came in, and now there's a finger in the dam. But think about it. Agencies like the Foundling, Graham Windham, Children's Aid Society, you name it, Acacia, which is very big up in the Bronx, we all lost 15 months of fundraising. You know, we can have virtual galas and all. It's not the same. I can't go meet with donors. I can't bring donors to programs and say, hey, listen, look at this, talk to these young. It's much harder to do. So we have to catch up in fundraising because, as you know, government doesn't pay the full bill. On a $220 million budget, the Foundling loses about $7 or $8 million a year. We have to go out and raise that money. And now we've lost a little time. We're fortunate. We have a little money in the bank, so we're not going to stop serving, but I got to play catch up. So as soon as the clouds do lift, I got to be in those restaurants at night. I got to be in people's homes, and I got to be pushing these issues. And, you know, at the end of the day, Daren, I'd like you to be involved with the Foundling, but be involved with something. If it's not the Foundling, if it's Graham Windham, if it's Acacia, be involved with something. Give back. Give back. Look out. Don't always look inside you. Look outside your house. The greater good to the community. We are in this together. We are in this together. I mean, I know it's a trite saying, but it is true. It is true.
It is. And listen, you know, we all have been blessed and we have an opportunity to pay it forward. And so where we can pay it forward, certainly we need to pay it forward. So I'm gonna tell you this on TV. Whatever you need, give a holler. I'll be glad to support, to help you out with the Foundling. A great organization, you're a great guy, and we definitely want to do that. All right?
Daren, thanks. You and your family, Trish, you and your family, everybody stay well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, Bill, thanks again. I want to let you know we are out of time here on the Social Justice Forums. We want you to join us next week where we continue to elevate the conversation. We promote civic engagement, and we want to see people just like you and I continue to be involved in making our city a much better place. Daren, Jaime saying take care. God bless.